Chapter 11. Dragon Fire. Septimus held a burning rushlight to light the way as he and Jenna walked through the coils of the lapis lazuli labyrinth. The last time Jenna had been there was 500 years in the past, and the flickering of the flame lighting up the blue lapis walls brought back terrifying memories of being dragged through it by the murderous ghost of Queen Ethelderda. At last they reached the arch that led into the great chamber of alchemy. After Septimus's descriptions of all the soot and sand, Jenna was expecting to see a wreck, but what met her was a bright glittering chamber full of gold, a testament to Septimus's cleaning skills. Jenna's gaze was at once drawn to the two huge patterned gold doors set in the wall opposite, the great doors of time that had once been the gateway to the glass of time itself. Even though she knew what the glass had shattered, and no one could now pass through them to another time, they still had a presence that gave her goosebumps. Jenna shivered and looked away to the neat ebony workbenches that lined the walls, clean and polished, with unpacked boxes stacked up neatly. Jenna loved all the gold gleaming softly in the candlelight. Gold catches, handles and hinges, tiny gold drawers below the workbenches, gold brackets that held up the shelves, and even the scuffed strips of gold that ran along the bottom of the ebony benches, protecting the precious wood from the boots of Marcellus's ancient and long-gone junior apprentices. Jenna and Marcellus shared a fascination for gold. To Jenna's right was the furnace, still unlit, with its funnel of a chimney snaking up through the domed ceiling. In the center of the chamber was a long table on which a line of candles was burning brightly, but something was missing. "Where's Marcellus?" asked Jenna. Septimus shrugged. "I don't know. He's always going off somewhere. He'll be back soon." Jenna sat down at the long table. "So, where does he go then?" "I don't know. He never says." "Don't you ask?" Septimus laughed. "I know you would, Jen, but it's not polite for an apprentice to ask things like that. He'd tell me if it was important." "Sounds weird to me," Jenna said. "I mean, what else is there to do down here?" The sound of footsteps in the labyrinth stopped their conversation. A few seconds later Marcellus Pye appeared through the archway. He looked startled. "Septimus, what are you doing back so soon?" "Oh, and Esmeralda." Marcellus was spooked. In the candlelight, Jenna looked so much like his long-gone sister, Esmeralda, that he had forgotten for a moment what time he was in. Being in the fire chamber still took him back to the old times. Marcellus recovered from his time-slip and offered Jenna the seat at the head of the table. "Please, Princess Jenna, sit down." Jenna took her seat, and Marcellus sat down a little shakily on the bench at the side of the table, leaving Septimus to take his usual place on the right-hand side. "Welcome to the great chamber, Princess Jenna," Marcellus said rather formally. "I am delighted that you have come to see it so soon. It is an integral part of the castle in which the queens have always taken a great interest, much greater, I believe, than in the wizard tower." Jenna nodded. She could believe that. Remembering what she had come for, she placed the leather bag on the table and took out the two bowls. Marcellus looked at them with interest. "Ah," he said, "the triple. How nice." He waited for Jenna to put the third bowl on the table. "There isn't another one," she said. "The python ate it." Marcellus looked shocked. "You must get it back right away. Kill the wretched snake if you have to." "It's not that easy," said Jenna. "You see," Marcellus got to his feet. "Well, Marcia will just have to go without her silly shoes." "Shoes?" asked Jenna, confused. "Her purple pythons. Isn't that the only reason Terry Tarsal keeps that ghastly snake? Marcia may not believe it, but some things are worth more than shoes, and this set of bowls is one of them. Terry Tarsal will just have to kill his precious python." Now Jenna understood. She sighed. "It's not Terry Tarsal's python, Marcellus. I wish it were." "Then whose python is it?" "It isn't anybody's python. It's the giant marsh python." Marcellus sat down. "Ah, unfortunately not quite so easy to catch." "No." "Well, that's a great shame. To lose the triple after all this time." "I told Jenna that you could clone them," Septimus said anxiously. Marcellus laughed. "You have great faith in me, apprentice, but there is much to do before we can even think of that." He sighed and stood up as if to end the meeting. "I am so sorry, Princess," he said. "I cannot clone the gold for you now. We are not yet ready." "So that's it then," said Jenna flatly. "She's going to die." Marcellus looked shocked. "Who is going to die?" "The dragon boat." "What? The dragon boat of Hotep Ra?" Jenna nodded, too upset to speak. "If you will forgive the question, Princess, why do you think she is going to die?" Marcellus asked. "I haven't heard her heart beat for a whole 5 days now. I go every day in the big freeze. Aunt Zelda said I should, and I do hear it. Even though no one else can, I always do. And now it's stopped." and the only thing my mother has ever asked me to do, I can't." Marcellus thought that Jenna had the same look that his sister Esmeralda used to have when teetering on the edge of a tantrum. He decided to tread carefully. "Tell me, Jenna, what is it that Sarah has asked you to do?" he asked gently. "Not Sarah, not Mum, my mother, the Queen." "The Queen? Her ghost has spoken to you?" "We think we heard something," Septimus said doubtfully. Jenna was distractedly tracing her finger around the design of the sun cut into the ancient wood of the table. "Sep, I heard my mother. I know it was her." She looked up at Marcellus. "Her ghost spoke when we were in the Queen's room." "Ah, then it is your mother," said Marcellus. "That is where the ghost of the previous queen always resides." "Does she? Why didn't you tell me?" asked Jenna. "Well, I assumed you knew," said Marcellus. "No, no one tells me anything," Jenna declared. "Not even my mother." Marcellus stood up. "Then it seems to me, Princess, that as your nearest relative on the royal side, it is time I stepped in. I will tell you all I know from my dear dead sister, and my less dear, but thankfully dead, mother." Jenna looked surprised. She had never thought of Marcellus as a relative, but it was true. He was, in fact, a great, and then some, uncle. Suddenly she felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. The dragon boat was no longer her worry alone. "Thank you," she said, smiling for the first time that day. "My pleasure, niece," said Marcellus. "Now, I suggest we repair to the boatyard and open the dragon house." "But what for? We've lost the triple, so we can't revive her," said Jenna, exasperated. She wondered whether Marcellus had actually listened to what she had been saying. "There's more than one way to skin a cat," said Marcellus. Jenna's patience ran out. Angrily she stood up, scraping the old oak chair back across the stone floor. "Stop talking in riddles, Marcellus," she snapped. Marcellus put his arm out to stop Jenna from going. "Forgive my obscure speech, Princess," he said. "What I mean is, there is more than one way to revive a dragon." He stood up and put his arm around Jenna's shoulders. "The magic way is beyond us now, so I shall show you the physic way." Janet Martin was sitting in her snow-covered hut in the boatyard, cooking her favorite sausage and bean stew, when, to her dismay, she saw the new castle alchemist walk by with the princess, the extraordinary apprentice, and then, as her tiny snow-dusted window filled with green, "Oh, not that wretched dragon," Janet muttered a sailor's curse and got to her feet. During the big freeze, Janet hibernated like a tortoise in her hut. She looked forward to the peace and quiet that the first flakes of snow brought with them. She sent her apprentices and dockhands home, and waited happily for the day the moat froze over, and not even the port barge could disturb the serenity of the boatyard. For the rest of the year, Janet worked day and night, eating, sleeping, and dreaming boatyard business, but the big freeze was her holiday. As she had grown older, Janet had begun to look forward to it so much that she had recently considered barring the way through the tunnel to ensure she was not disturbed by anyone from the castle. The sight of 3 castle dignitaries walking by her tiny snow-dusted window, accompanied by a notoriously heavy-footed dragon, made her wish she had done just that. There was a sharp rap on her door, and Janet briefly toyed with the idea of pretending she was not there, in the hope they would go away. But the thought of them poking unsupervised around her boatyard, and even worse, the heavy-footed dragon trampling on the delicate shells of the upturned boats, got Janet opening the hut door with a growled, "What?" The new castle alchemist spoke. "Good day, Mistress Martin. Janet bristled. "I am no one's mistress, alchemist." Janet, who disapproved of alchemy, managed to make alchemist sound like an insult. "Janet Martin is my name, and Janet Martin is what I answer to." "Ah, forgive me. Janet Martin. Yes, indeed. Ahem." Janet, who was nearly a foot shorter than Marcellus, folded her arms belligerently and squinted up at the alchemist. "What do you want?" Marcellus looked down at the small, wiry woman, swathed in a thick blue-black woolen sailor's coat that was far too big for her, and reached almost to the ground. He could see she meant business. Her iron-gray hair was scraped back into a sailor's pigtail that seemed to bristle with annoyance, and every deep-set, wind-burned line in her face showed just how displeased she was to see him. Marcellus took a deep breath. He knew that what he had to say was not going to go down well. "We have come to open the dragon house," he said. "I am sorry for any inconvenience it may cause." Janet looked flabbergasted. "You what?" Jenna decided to step in. "I'm really sorry, Janet," she said, "but I think the dragon boat is dying. We have to get into the dragon house. We have to try to save her." Janet liked Jenna, who reminded her of how she had been as a girl, confident, taking charge kind of person. That, thought Janet, was how girls should be. Well, Princess, I am most sorry to hear that. Of course you must open the dragon house, though how you propose to do that I have no idea. You do realize there is no opening any more, just a solid wall?" Jenna nodded. "Yes, that's why we have Spitfire with us." "So I noticed," said Janet dryly. She looked up at the dragon, and Spitfire's green eyes with their red ring of fire around the iris met her disapproving stare. Spitfire shifted uneasily from one foot to another. He felt as though he had done something wrong, although he wasn't sure what. He finished chewing the cow bone that Septimus had just fed him, and a large glob of dribble headed for Janet's sealskin boot. Janet moved her boot just in time. "Well, I suppose if you must. Don't let him tread on anything, will you?" she said. "I don't want anything broken." "We shall naturally take great care," said Marcellus, and gave a small bow. Janet, who thought bowing was an affectation, harumphed and turned to go back inside her hut. "Thank you, Janet," said Jenna. "Thank you so much." Janet thawed a little more. "I hope you find your boat as well, despite your fears, Princess Jenna," she said. She stood at the hut door, watching the group pick its way across the boatyard as they headed toward the castle wall within which the dragon house was secreted. Janet was just closing the hut door, and looking forward to her sausage and beans, when she saw Spitfire about to step on a large pile of snow, under which lay her favorite rowboat. "Stop!" she yelled, running out of the hut and waving her arms. The group did not hear. Janet saw that Spitfire was about to lower his foot. Suddenly she remembered something from her childhood. "Freeze!" she screamed. It worked. Everyone stopped in mid-step, including Spitfire, whose great foot hovered a few inches above the pile of snow. Janet raced out into the snow. "Wait right there!" she yelled. "Don't move an inch!" Spitfire stood with his foot swaying uncertainly in mid-air, looking increasingly unsteady. Janet hurtled to a halt beside them. "Don't step there!" she said. Spitfire looked down at Janet and wobbled. Any minute now, Septimus thought. He will topple over and squash someone. "Easy now, Spitfire," said Septimus. "Put your foot down here, next to mine." He looked at Janet. "It's okay there?" Janet sounded relieved. "Yes, thank you, apprentice." "Ouch!" Septimus gasped. Spitfire's foot had come to rest on his boot. Janet now insisted on piloting the party across the yard. Dragons and boatyards did not mix, she told the visitors sternly. They reached the other side without any breakages, and came to the edge of the cut, which was a short and apparently dead-end run of water that led off the moat and ended at the high castle wall. Because the water in the cut was virtually unaffected by the moat's currents, it froze early. It was, Janet informed them, easily thick enough to support the weight of a dragon. Septimus was not so sure. Spitfire was, as his throbbing foot was telling him, extremely heavy. But it was true. The cut was an ideal spot for the dragon to take off from, safely away from the boatyard clutter. To get to the nearest alternative takeoff area, Septimus would have to walk his dragon back through the boatyard, and he didn't relish telling Janet that. The cut it would have to be. Septimus climbed up into the dragon's pilot dip. "Okay, Spitfire, forward, 1 foot at a time, and slowly." Spitfire looked at the ice and snorted doubtfully. "Come on, Spitfire," Septimus urged. "Foot down." Spitfire stretched out his huge right foot. Its green scales glistened against the smooth white snow that covered the cut. He leaned out from the icy edge, tipped forward a little, and suddenly Spitfire went sliding onto the cut. A groan came from deep within the ice, and Septimus felt the surface beneath the dragon's feet shift. "Up!" he yelled to Spitfire. His shout was lost in the crack that spread across the ice like the sound of the ripping of 1,000 sheets. Spitfire needed no urging to go. He thrust his wings down just enough to raise his weight off the ice at the very moment it fell away beneath his feet. In a spray of ice splinters and snow, Septimus and Spitfire were airborne. Jenna, Marcellus, and Janet watched Spitfire rise up and head slowly toward the blank wall at the end of the cut. Janet, who appreciated how difficult it was to maneuver odd-shaped craft in confined spaces, was impressed. When Spitfire was only a few feet away from the wall, he stopped, and hovered so that his nose was level with the burnished gold disc set into the castle wall. The disc was just above a line of dressed stones that arched gracefully through the castle wall. This was the only clue to the hidden entrance to the dragon house. A thrill of excitement ran through Septimus. He and Spitfire were going to make fire for real, not some practiced run trying to hit the metal fire target in the dragon field. This was actually going to do something. It was going to open the dragon house. He studied Spitfire and patted his neck. "Ignite!" he yelled. A deep rumble began inside Spitfire's fire stomach. taking the phosphorus from the bones that Septimus had hastily fed him on his way to the boatyard, and turning it into the gases that would combine to make fire. The plume of gas swept up through Spitfire's fire gullet, and hit the air where it spontaneously ignited with a loud whoof. A thin, blindingly bright jet of fire streamed from the dragon's mouth, and hit the very center of the gold disc. The disc began to glow, and turn from a dull gold to a dusky orange, to bright red, to a blinding white. Then there was a sudden flash of brilliant purple, which caused everyone to flinch and shut their eyes, Spitfire included. When the watchers beside the cut opened their eyes, there was a collective sharp intake of breath. The wall was gone, and the dragon house was revealed, a towering lapis lazuli doomed cavern, covered in golden hieroglyphics. And below, held fast within clear blue ice, lay the dragon boat, her head resting on a marble walkway, where it had been laid almost 3 years earlier. A sudden shout came from below. Septimus looked down to see Jenna running toward the dragon house. "She's covered in ice," he heard Jenna yell. "She's dead!"